This is Ron with Circadian Crop Sciences. If you haven't heard about Triacontanol and if you don't know what it can do for you, uh, hang around and watch this presentation, and I think you're going to be very interested. So what is Triacontanol? You could go to Google Scholar and type in Triacontanol, and you can read through hundreds of published studies where they've looked at what Triacontanol can do to different crops and plants. Or you can stick around and we'll help you make sense of it. So tricontanol is a naturally occurring waxy substance. It's found abundantly in nature. It's a fatty alcohol. It's a 30 carbon chain alcohol, so it's really long, and it's waxy. Uh, Other related waxes that it's found with are called polycosanols. They're like 29 carbons long, 28 carbons. But they're all associated with tricontanol. But tricontanol is the one we really care about. We also care a little bit about octosanol because it counteracts the benefit of tricontanol. So if your tricontanol source is high in octosanol, then you're not going to get the full benefit of having tricontanol. Uh, Tricontanol, everything in life is toxic, even pure oxygen or whatever. But, tricontanol, we eat it all the time. It's in the waxy covering of leaves. It's in the germ of corn. It's part of our diet. And it's actually good for us. So some studies show that it can reduce cholesterol levels. It melts at 88 degrees Celsius and it's virtually insoluble in water. Why we care about it is because tricontanol is a biostimulant. And, you know, science has known this for a long time. I mean, the first patents on tricontanol came out in the 70s. So it's not like this is new. It's been around. We just, you know, we don't necessarily know how to best use it, but we're starting to get a handle on that. So it improves growth in plants subject to environmental stresses. So if you have low light, it helps plants assimilate carbon better, so they grow better. Same within high light. If it's hot, if they're subject to cold stress or high salinity or drought, you'll see an even bigger difference in the benefit to plants. It increases the uptake of water and nutrients. It improves the efficiency of photosynthesis. It enhances the physiological efficiency of plant cells. It can increase branching in some plants. And so purportedly can create an immune response that may suppress certain plant diseases. About the natural sources of tricontanol, as I said, it's in the waxy covering of leaves, and present in the germ of seeds. It's in sugarcane, rice bran, beeswax. It's not a harmful substance, so you can be comfortable knowing that if you're working with tricontanol, you're not going to hurt yourself. In nature, it's bound to other waxes. The bad one would be octosanol, which would negate the benefit of tricontanol. Typically, you'd apply tricontanol to your plants as a foliar spray, a root drench, or a seed soak. As a foliar spray, you're dissolving tricontanol in a solvent, you're emulsifying it, and you're spraying it on the plant foliage where it is absorbs. Rates range from 5, that's parts per billion, to about 7.5 parts per million. That's kind of what you see in the publications out there. I think 7.5 parts per million is way too high, but you know, uh, there is a broad range. Uh, when you look at the science out there, we're just barely understanding this because, you know, maybe two applications at 400 parts per billion spaced a week apart are equivalent to one application at 8 parts per billion, or maybe it's better. There's hasn't really been too many studies that have shown how application frequency affects it. The timing seems, in some of these experiments, just seems like it's suboptimal. So I don't think I've seen a study out there that really completely optimizes the use of tricontanol, but still these studies are showing some very good results. As a root drench, it's pretty much just the same thing, is dissolving the tricontanol in a solvent, emulsifying it, and then applying it through irrigation lines, or at 5 parts per billion to 7 parts per million as well. And you can simply incorporate alfalfa leaves into the soil or media if you want, and it confer a benefit to the plants. So, is that the optimal way to do it? Probably not, but it's a decent way to go about it. You can also do a seed soak. And so, the seeds are generally soaked for 6 to 24 hours in solutions with 5 parts per billion to 10 parts per million is what I've seen out there in the scientific literature. I've done some experimenting myself with, your common vegetable crops, and do not go above like 40 parts per billion. In every instance, I've seen negative effects from going above 40 parts per billion. It just, in what I've tested. So 40 is a good rate, and probably less than that. So that's another way you can apply tricontanol. So here's some, I'm going to go through just a few of the research studies that are out there. This one was published in Acta Horticulture in 2009. And with this application, they were foliar applied potassium and tricontanol. So these were seedlings 40 days after transplanting tomato seedlings, sprays of 1 part per million. So actually, that's a pretty high rate. Just and of tricontanol, and that was with 90 parts per million of potassium. And those were applied to plants at 10-day intervals for a total of 4 applications. Treated plants saw the following percentage improvement versus the non-treated. So you can see about everything you could quantify on the plant benefited from those applications. And most significantly, because I think if you're a farmer, you care about yield and quality, the yield per plant was increased by 57%. And if you look at that, the weight per fruit was increased, and the lycopene content, which is a quality measurement, was increased, and the ascorbic acid was increased as well. So you got higher yield and better quality. So it's hard to beat that. I think they could have even gotten better results if they had started earlier. If you look at a lot of the research out there and the early patents on tricontanol, the earlier you treat with tricontanol, you tend to get a bigger boost from earlier treatments in the crop development than treatments later in crop development. So that's one way they possibly could have improved on the yield. Also, one of the old patents recommends combining tricontanol with bivalent ions like magnesium or calcium, but they got very good results combining it with potassium, and we don't know if that's a necessity. I don't think so, because in other studies it isn't. So in this study published in the International Journal of Agriculture, we see that even with plants that are given all the nutrition they need and are watered so that they're not subject to drought stress, you can still get a very good growth response from an application of tricontanol. In this case, they had one treatment of tricontanol at 5 parts per million, and that was at the time the plants first started fruiting. And at the end of evaluating these plants of the experiment, they found the treated plants had 26% increase in the plant spread, so the surface area they're covering, and had a 21% increase in flowers per plant, and the berry weight per plant per fruit, was higher as well. Our take is that you could get better results with more frequent applications, started at an earlier phase of plant development, than having just one application at a high rate. In this study, published in the Journal of Plant Interactions, we see that seeds of Artemisia were started in November, and the seedlings from those that sprouted, were transplanted to the field in January. Sufficient fertility was maintained throughout the experiment, and the plants were sprayed with various concentrations of tricontanol with gibberellic acid. Spraying started 30 days after transplanting and was repeated once every 10 days for the next 60 days, at which point the plants were sampled. In this case, they only saw a mild improvement in plant yield, the dry weight, but they saw a much more significant increase in yield of both plant dry weight and the terpene artemisinin, which is the desired component of the essential oil. When gibberellic acid was combined at 75 parts per million with triacontanol at 1.5 parts per million. So there are synergies out there with tricontanol that can improve its performance on certain crops. Gibberellic acid is by no means the only compound out there, chemical out there, that can cause a synergistic response. In this experiment, this was published in Biologia Plantarum. In this study, they took the hypocotyl region, the region between the roots and the cotyledons, were cut out and soaked in solutions of varying concentrations of tricontanol for 24 hours before they were transferred to estuarine water, which is where mangroves grow in that type of water, and they were incubated at room temperature. After 20 days, they were evaluated. You can see at 40 parts per billion, there was a huge improvement, 84% more roots and 134% increase in dry weight accumulation on those cuttings that were treated with that rate of tricontanol. At 200 parts per billion, you did have more roots, but overall your dry weight accumulation was less. And if you just increase that by 40 more parts per billion, it was disastrous. So, 40 parts per billion in the study was the optimum range, but they did not go any lower than that. So the optimum could actually be 20 parts per billion or 5 parts per billion. We don't know, but they did get very good results at 40 parts per billion. Um, so, you know, if you're going to experiment with using this on cuttings, I'd go with 40 parts per billion or less. Here's just some other studies. You can go to Google Scholar if you want and type in tricontanol and you'll find all sorts of studies. But here, 10 parts per billion in a nutrient solution um, was provided to rice seedlings grown in low light condition, and where the control plants lost weight, the tricontanol treated plants gained weight. And the study below that, which was published in Nature, they found much improved yield and better quality fruit when they sprayed one time with 800 parts per billion of tricontanol in these saline stressed cucumber plants. So, you know, a big difference there. This other study, I threw this in here because it was uh, kind of interesting because they found that one application at 5 part per million on pepper seedlings decreased the density of tomato spotted wilt virus in treated plants. And really, I don't know of anything that can prevent tomato spotted wilt virus or really inhibit it. So I'm a little skeptical about this, but it is interesting nonetheless. This is a guide I got from a Taiwanese company that markets tricontanol throughout the world, and they these are their guidelines for uh, growers in Asia and what they're putting on crops in Asia. And there are, over 1 million hectares of agriculture in Asia that uh, consistently use tricontanol. And if you look at the different crops, there's an application timing on when they recommend applying it. There's their dosage, and their dosages are all pretty low, down in the lower parts per billion. And they show some disease suppression, some, you know, tolerance to cold and uh, increased quality and that sort of thing. If you go to our website, you can look at this document again, but I'm just going to go through here pretty quick. Here's more uh, of their recommendations for using tricontanol in agriculture. And more of their recommendation. You can see, like with grapes at the top there, uh, they're showing an increase in yield and quality of 30 to 100%. So, that seems pretty amazing. But, we got to take these with a little dose of skepticism. But they're out there for you to, uh, to take it as you want. I don't know. And here with tomatoes, they show a 20 to 150% improvement. So potentially, according to their data, it's a pretty incredible uh, thing that tricontanol is doing for them. So our take on the Taiwanese recommendations is we're not clear concerning the frequency of application and whether the application is through root trenches or foliar sprays. We also don't have access to their experimental methods and data. We have seen ourselves that there's benefits to tricontanol, but use that table as a starting point for further evaluating and optimizing the application of tricontanol on crops. And I think if we use it that way and don't put too much stock in it until we've kind of proven it for ourselves. We have tricontanol in 2 of our products. We've had this lab verified. There's actually only less than a handful of labs in the United States that can even test for tricontanol. But our Circadian Sunrise formulation has 30 parts per million of tricontanol in the concentrate, and the Long Shadow has 74 parts per million of tricontanol in the concentrate, and that is lab verified. Here's a dilution table. So if you wanted to use our products and have a 25 parts per billion concentration in the final product, you would add only 3.7 milliliters per gallon of water. To achieve that with Circadian Sunrise and with Long Shadow, you would only need 1.3 milliliters per gallon. And 100 parts per million, 14.8, etc. So these products can be used to provide biostimulants to your crops. So why did we formulate Circadian Sunrise and Long Shadow with tricontanol? It really wasn't so much to get a positive crop response and increase growth and fruit quality and all that. My experience really was, and this is from doing over 35 years of pest control in agriculture, was that essential oils did kill just as well, or even better in many instances than your conventional pesticides. But they tended to stunt plants more, and they tended to, it's very easy to get a burn. So I tended to steer away from them. But in formulating these products, my idea was to combine them with antioxidants and the tricontanol to offset the damaging effect of using essential oil products on your crops. And so it worked. And especially with this Circadian Sunrise, we've rather than have phytotoxicity and stunting, we see the opposite. So that's and why we formulated the tricontanol in there. Plus the essential oils, they tend to strip waxes from leaves. So we redeposit our waxes down, one of which is the tricontanol essential oil. Also, because of that stripping action, it helps to get the tricontanol into the leaf faster. So, the essential oils improving the performance of the tricontanol, and the tricontanol is improving the use, improving the pesticide overall, its functionality, by making it so it's not going to harm your plants. We get our antioxidants and our tricontanol primarily from raw corn oil. Raw corn oil is unprocessed; it's just cold pressed. So in the stuff that you buy at the store, it's had all the good stuff, all the waxes, stripped out. We make sure those are in there. They were meant to be in there for the corn seedling to get off to a good start, and we leave it in there because it's good for your plants. The long shadow, cinnamon oil product, we have uh, finely ground coffee in there as well. That also provides some different antioxidants, but the coffee will absorbs some of the essential oil, leaves it, deposits it on the leaf surface, deters feeding by some insects. It's our for thrip control. It's our better product for that that because it deters feeding by insects like thrips. Um, You can use our long shadow and circadian sunrise as biostimulants. You're free to experiment with their potential without concern of exceeding pesticide residue tolerance. And that's because our products are exempt from residue tolerance requirements by the EPA. The active ingredients are actually approved by the Food and Drug Administration as food additives. So they're not considered to leave pesticide residues. And by experimenting with tricontanol, you're really discovering things that really are not even published yet. Uh, we don't know, but it is a safe material for the general public to actually do some experimentation, just like you would in your kitchen with cooking uh, pastries or whatever. So you can, by experimenting, you could hurt your plants. Because too much of a good thing is not a good thing. We'll give you some guidelines to help optimize your chances for success. So follow the safety precautions on our labels. We don't want you to get it in your eyes. Some people, the cinnamon oil especially can, you know, irritate your skin and your eyes. Don't exceed the maximum rate on our labels. They're maximum rates for a reason. Uh, Leave at least 5 untreated plants so that you can make comparisons too. And you know, as a scientist, you probably take dry weights at the end and all that. But if it's not dramatically visible with your eye, consider it a bust. So I think you'll see some dramatic results if you do it right. Seed soaking, that's one way of applying tricontanol. Uh, we think you're going to have best results less than 200 parts per billion, and really, I think 40 parts per billion and less is for most seeds going to be optimal. We have tested a number of seed soakings with a number of field crops, and really 200 parts per billion, that's max. I think by far and away, most seeds, it's going to be 40 parts per billion or less is where you're going to see a benefit. With applying tricontanol in the root zone, we believe a constant dose of tricontanol in your feed solution is the way to go. In a very low rate. You don't need much, just say 2 to 10 parts per billion, just a constant feed in there. And starting from day one. And if you do think that you need additional boosts, give it those as foliar applications. And foliar sprays are what we've primarily looked at for tricontanol. With circadian sunrise, we recommend between 1 and 3 ounces per gallon, and with long shadow between 1/2 to 1 ounce per gallon. And doing weekly applications, starting at the seedling rooted cutting stage and continuing up to a couple of weeks before harvest. We really can't. We can say that from our experience, the difference between the crops was very noticeable well before the final harvest, and we're not even sure those last few applications did anything, or the differences were established uh, fairly early on. So those last few applications might not have been even necessary. We just sprayed to dampen the foliage. We didn't spray like we were going after spider mites or russet mites and just drenching the plants to the leaf drip. So we just sprayed, uh, light spray, kissed the foliage with the spray, and that was it. As for rooting cuttings, I think you're going to need to be below 40 parts per billion, 40 or less. But I think there's a good chance you're going to see some benefits from the tricontanol there. Also, a technique in taking your cuttings, it means a lot. Make sure you cut at like a 45 to 60 degree angle. Uh, you're going to get a bigger surface area that way, a bigger wound, bigger area to take up water. Roots form at wounded tissues. So you can also make several other shallow little cuts along the stem where it's going to be set in the media. You can get more leaves that way. If you get, say, a leaf that you break off that's going to go in the media, where you break that leaf off, that's generally a great place where you're going to get roots as well. But good luck with trying tricontanol as a rooting agent, and we'd love to hear your results because we really don't have a lot of experience with using it for cuttings. And there you have it. Go out there, unleash the potential, let us know how it goes, and we'll try to follow up on your data that you give us, and we can change the world.